Sometimes I feel like the folks at the Fox propaganda outlet really enjoy when Donald Trump does indefensible things, says indefensible things, because it allows them to demean themselves, to continue to go lower, be stranger, more outlandish in their ridiculous defenses of Donald Trump. And we saw that recently after Donald Trump really just started a trade war for no reason. We saw a couple of days ago with Colombia, and Fox, for some reason, is still talking about it, still trying to get the attention of their dear leader, of their favorite Donald. And one specific host went out of their way to make this wild claim about how Donald Trump is playing 4D chess. He's got this master plan trying to cover up for his failure, and they really just lost it on camera. It was really embarrassing, and we are going to get into that. But before we do, if I could quickly ask you to leave a like on this video, and if you haven't already and you enjoy our channel, to hit that subscribe button. It goes a long way, and it really means the world to me. Now let's get into this ridiculous clip.
Coffee from Colombia. We actually make our own coffee here too in Kona, in Hawaii, right? There's multiple things coming out of our neighbors' countries that aren't sort of reducible to one thing, but I think that's part of what the media has been articulating this entire time, arguing that the GOP reduces humans to an identity, but really it's them shoving these countries into boxes. President Trump sees them as partners.
Yeah, what's interesting is Trump's trying to bring about a world where he'll drop the rate for companies that actually come here and make some of that stuff to 15% tax rate. So we might not have to miss coffee or whatever they think they're going to miss that we can clearly make our own, but maybe not as much of, because maybe some of those countries will come here and they'll package their stuff or distribute it from here.
So what is being said by this Fox host is that it's good that Donald Trump is starting a trade war with Colombia, because although tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of Americans consume coffee every day, and if this trade war continues, they'll pay substantially more for it, something that's already pretty expensive. What Trump is doing is making us pay more in a patriotic way, and he's encouraging us to grow coffee at home, even though that's not something we do. And by the time, even if we were able to, it wouldn't be able to match the rising demand and the higher cost. And it's just like the low levels that these Fox hosts go to just try to suck up to Donald Trump is so humiliating. And it really represents the strength of the right-wing ecosystem, how they're willing to defend anything Donald Trump does. And I've talked so much about how we have to build that on the left. Certainly nothing as cult-like as this, but there is a constant rapid response effort to everything Donald Trump does to try to shine it up, repackage it, and put it out for their audience. And we need to be able to combat that. Democrats need to be pushing back, need to be building our own media environment. We absolutely need to be doing that.
And that is why I am so glad to be joined by David Hogg today on the show, running for DNC Vice Chair. David, thank you so much for joining us today, man.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, obviously, since Election Day, there has been this broad conversation, and you've certainly been a part of it, but Democrats at large talking about how we have to combat this right-wing media ecosystem, which is always dominating the conversation about the issues that we care about most. Now, what are you going to do as a surrogate, if elected DNC vice chair, to push back against that, but also help build up the liberal media infrastructure that we certainly need?
Well, I in this position, I think the first thing that we need to do after this election is realize that, we had a lot of voters telling us that prices were too high. We had a lot of them telling us that Joe Biden was too old. And effectively, our message to them in many instances were, no, they aren't, and no, he's not. And if we tell voters not to believe their eyes and not to believe their wallets, we're going to lose them. I think the first step is making sure that people feel like we are actually listening to them and care about what they're saying. I think what that could have looked like in this election is talking about, well, the reason why the price of housing is going up so much is in part because corporations are buying up tens of thousands of single family homes around the country. Talking about what we are doing as Democrats to combat that, to fight for working families and actually enable them to achieve the American dream more, instead of having it stolen from them by a corporation. We didn't do that. And, just approaching people with statistics is not a good way of changing their mind. Unfortunately, this is politics. It is theater. It is not debate club. It's storytelling, stories that change minds. And in my own view, I think part of what we need to do is work with a lot more influencers, both political and non-political influencers, to talk about what we are doing as a party to deliver for people on the issues that really matter to them, that are affecting them on a day-to-day basis, and also do a lot more work to expand the vision that I think Democrats have had of what the working class is, to be more inclusive, not only of people, working to build F-150s in Dearborn, Michigan, but also inclusive of the people that are driving for Uber and Lyft, to the people that are working for Amazon and being exploited by a lot of the tech oligarchs that are across, much of Silicon Valley, and talking about what we're doing to help protect them and deliver for them. Because the fact that right now we're seeing them vote in line with those same oligarchs for people like Trump is crazy to me. And it's not so much a testament. It's a really damning indictment of our party, I think, the fact that that is happening, but it doesn't have to be that way.
No, it certainly doesn't. And we need to package that message. Certainly you are able to, as just, let's be honest, like just a regular guy, in a way that maybe the consultant speech, let me draft up this really succinct memo, whatever it may be, doesn't really hit close to home. And that audience that we really need to reach, part of that is going and being in the platforms where they are. Would you see yourself potentially going on a Joe Rogan, being in any of those Barstool pods, going on with Shane Gillis to try to deliver this message to people who aren't ever seeking out politics? They're always bumping into it, and you would definitely be a part of that solution.
Yeah, I'd be more than happy to do that, but I think that there's also important work that we need to do to show who the other young men are, throughout the party, and that there is a place for them in this party, and that we're not seeing empathy as a zero-sum game, right? I think that's one of the biggest things that we need to fight against, is this idea that we can only be fighting for young women. I think we also need to be talking about the mental health crisis that young men are going through, the fact that we're not going to college nearly as much as we used to, the fact that there's a loneliness epidemic, and realizing that if we don't address those things, it's not going to be good either for young men or young women, because then we're going to continue to have more people like Donald Trump get elected that gives them a sense of community through something hateful like misogyny, or some other form of hatred, that we obviously don't want in the first place. But I'm more than happy to go on those platforms and have those tough conversations. I mean, when I was in college, I joined the shooting club, not because I like to have easy, and that wasn't because I was the most popular guy there, obviously, although I was one of the best shots. It's because I wanted to talk to the people who disagreed with me most. Because what I've learned from that experience, and talking to hundreds, if not thousands of people at this point who don't agree with me on things like stronger gun laws, is that more often than not, most of the people who disagree with us, or might say they disagree with us in a poll, oftentimes it's because they feel like we don't respect them, listen to them, or care about them. And when you actually have a conversation with somebody where you say, I can respect that you don't agree with this, but how about X, Y, and Z thing? Like, for example, do you think somebody that threatens to shoot up a high school should be able to own an AR-15 like the shooter at my high school did at the age of 19 years old? Do you think it makes sense that in America right now, with federally licensed dealers, that you can't buy a handgun if you're under 21, but you can buy an AR-15, right? Like really basic things like that. We don't need to convince everybody of everything that we believe in. If we can get them to fight less hard against us and believe some of the things that we are fighting for, it gives them the opportunity to feel like maybe there could be a place for them in our party.
Yeah, and I definitely feel like we need to be positioning ourselves as not people who are speaking at voters or reaching them in that way, but just kind of communicating and uplifting people that they can feel, maybe aspirational isn't the right word, but that they feel like that they can relate to. And you've obviously done so much great work organizing, identifying, uplifting young leaders. My current congressman and Maxwell Frost was obviously is a good friend of yours and worked alongside you at March for Our Lives. You done such great work with Leaders We Deserve. How are you going to be, in your role, if you were to be elected DNC vice chair, working to identify more up and coming young organizers, just talents in the Democratic Party? I feel like the Republican Party has really honed in on finding people who are great communicators. Now, they communicate a message that we don't like and it's very hateful, but it breaks through for them. And when they're not identifying media personalities to run for office, it's like even Bernie Moreno is a car salesman. He knows how to talk. What will be your objective in finding that young talent and encouraging that infrastructure of great creators and organizers and people in the party?
I mean, for one, I think we need to do a lot better outreach when there are people that are leading. There have been a few instances that I've seen on the road. Like there was a woman that gave this incredibly impassioned speech in Houston, Texas, to her school board, where she just completely obliterated them. And she was a younger woman. I mean, younger for politics. I think she was in her late 30s or early 40s. But it was an incredible speech, and she was actually recruited to run for state legislature and won in that race. And she's an incredible orator and very passionate. And I think what we need to do is find those people that are out there that are leading these fights, whether or not it's them working to unionize their sector of the gig economy, for example, and showing them there is a connection between the Lyft driver, that's driving here in Washington, D.C., and the person that's helping to build cars in Michigan in that labor fight. It's finding those voices and uplifting them and giving people, passionate people, a platform. People want somebody who's not going to sidestep questions. People want somebody who's not a robot. People want somebody who's a human being that actually answers questions and isn't focus grouped and polled and all these other things, but really just tells it how it is. That's what people are craving, is that authenticity and understanding that we're never obviously going to make everybody happy, but people need to say what they believe in, because if you just get to wherever you are to try to build your power by constantly compromising yourself, ultimately you don't have that power because you're just a puppet to somebody else.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think it was your good friend, someone who has endorsed you, Governor Tim Walz, who said, we can find compromise without compromising our values. And I think that's so key, because if everyone thinks that we're going to cede on everything or try to get ahead with one easy out or easy step, it just doesn't feel real. That's why, not to bring this conversation to something completely different, but, some of the votes on confirming Donald Trump's cabinet nominees, I've been so confused as why are we ceding any ground on this is business as usual? It's not, and we still seemingly talk like it. And I think that makes everyone scared, but it also makes them feel alone, which is the worst thing that we can be doing right now. And I had a question. I don't know if it's along those lines, but it's certainly something I know you're definitely familiar with. Your name has been used a lot in fundraising text. I've even gotten some of them. And this is another kind of conversation about the Democratic brand at large that people have had. Obviously, we do need to raise money. It is important. And there are very well message tested means to make sure that we're getting as many dollars as possible. But then that leaves people kind of feeling a little strange about their relationship. What is your broad pitch? What is your gut check? Some small improvements that can be made to that process, knowing that the DNC still has to raise money.
Yeah, I mean, for one, I know that there's a lot of texts that I send out, obviously, but that's because our candidates with Leaders We Deserve don't take corporate money. But we need it costs a hell of a lot of money to run for office, and I would rather send a few of those texts than have to take money from corporations, because then ultimately
completely agree
doing this. And it's only because of those people, those 150. We have over 150,000 individual donors who support us that we're able to do this work at all, that I'm able to do this work at all. And I'm incredibly grateful to have them, because we're never going to be able to reform the party or fix our campaign finance system if we have candidates that are perpetually taking money from special interests. And that's part of the reason why I set up Leaders We Deserve, is to lay the groundwork for those young people to be out there and not be owned by anybody other than their constituents ultimately.
Yeah. And I will say, when I see your name, and I'll let you finish, but when I see your name on a text instead of, you have 10 minutes or else all hell is going to break, I feel a little bit better about it. I'll definitely say that.
And what I'll say is, when we send our texts, we say we never are saying oh my God, we're gonna match your thing 800 times or whatever BS that is, right? We're not I'm very intentional in making sure that in our communications with our donors, through our email and our SMS programs, that we're not treating them like an ATM. Yes, there are a lot of texts obviously that come through, but ultimately it's about forming a relationship with our donors and respecting them, and also using that for good purposes. Recently, when there were wildfires in LA, I actually lived in Los Angeles until I was 14 years old. And I remember being in, middle school and seeing the smoke from wildfires rise up from the mountains and come over my school, and then it literally raining ash in a very dystopian way. And when we saw that, our team came together and we said, okay, how can we use our platform, the emails that we have and other things like that, to help them raise money? We ended up raising over $34,000 for the relief efforts, because people were very generous in doing that. And it went directly to groups like World Central Kitchen and United Way in Los Angeles to support their efforts. And I think there's just a lot in terms of our communications with our donors, from the DNC's perspective. We need to treat people more like human beings and less like ATMs. Right? I don't want to send emails constantly saying I don't want to send emails constantly saying democracy is going to end if you don't give me $5 right now, because then what happens when we lose the election and people can still vote, right? The message of saying that if we are not elected, democracy is going to end tomorrow. And then after the election, I don't know if you got this sense, this kind of general well, guys, we tried our best. There isn't anything we could have done differently. And we'll see you again in 4 years. That's not acceptable to me. That's not leadership. And I think that there's real accountability that needs to be had in our leadership of the Democratic Party. And I've talked about this myself because I'm not here just to say like, well, you need to take accountability. And I played no role in this. I am, a person that is part of the Democratic Party that is fighting to elect more young people and advance a progressive vision for our country. When I look back at what I could have done differently, I met with President Biden 18 months ago. And he asked me, what can I do to win young voters? And what I wish I had said, even though it probably would have done nothing, and I probably would have been kicked out of that meeting and never welcomed back, was I wish I told him that he should drop out. Because ultimately we know that ended up, regardless of whether or not you thought that was the right decision at the time, it was the decision that he ended up making.
Yes, exactly.
Had we had more time and a primary process as well, frankly, I think we could have avoided this potentially, but we didn't have that. And it was in part because our party was ostracizing people that even brought up the thought that maybe he shouldn't run again because of his age, when voters were telling us one of the top things was that he was too old. And unfortunately, even if he is there cognitively, if you are not able to be the communicator in chief to people and they feel like you're not there, they're not going to believe it. And that's the way that I look at this. Is I'm far from perfect, and when I do make a mistake, I want to take ownership of it, acknowledge it, and move forward so we can build a better party. And I can lead by example as a young person, not just repeat what I've seen throughout the past couple of election cycles from the party.
Yeah, authenticity, accountability. We certainly need more of it. I appreciate it, you bringing it to this conversation, and I'm really hoping you're going to be bringing it as DNC vice chair this time next month. David, thank you so much for joining the show today. I really appreciate it, brother.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.